Hello friends, my name is Caroline and this is another video in my homeschooling series. I'm a homeschooling mom of 5 school-aged girls, and then I also have a toddler, and we have homeschooled for 6 years total, 1 year in the beginning, and then my girls went to private school for several years, and then I brought everybody home. And I've made some other videos about our story and why I chose a Charlotte Mason education, Ambleside online, and some other curriculums that you can go back and watch. But today's video is going to be all about narration. So I want to start off by saying that I am not a Charlotte Mason expert, but I have tried to learn from the experts. And I've also had lots of experience putting this into real life practice. I think everything I'm saying is correct, but some people may disagree with me. But I think it's close enough that it should hopefully help you in some real life examples of what narration looks like in a homeschooling setting and in a large family, specifically using Ambleside online, but I think this could work with any Charlotte Mason curriculum or plan. So narration was something that was used by Charlotte Mason and the people who follow her to check the comprehension of what the child learned from the reading that you read to them or that they read to themselves in the older years. But it's also kind of developing the brain in the ability to listen with attention the first time and then be able to retell in your own words what the information was about. So she would use this in the place of like a quiz or a test. And if you've ever tried it for yourself, you will know that being able to tell somebody what a chapter of a book was about, or what a documentary was about, or anything where you're taking in information, being able to retell it in your own words, it's actually really difficult. You have to have pretty much a mastery of the information. So that's why a lot of people in a Charlotte Mason education would choose to use this over just using tests and quizzes. Obviously, it may not be as functional in a large classroom setting, although Charlotte Mason did use this in her schools that she developed. But this is the way that we use after a child reads from a living book or is read to from a living book, to get the child retelling what they learned about and also to see what they understood from it. So in the elementary years, the goal of narration is not a perfect recall. This is not the same as being able to recite a bunch of dates. The child may not get things in the right chronological order. They may mix up characters. They may mix up names. Some kids will be able to tell you almost verbatim what you read to them, but a lot of kids won't. And that is not the goal of narration. The goal of narration in the elementary years, because later on they're going to cover all of these subjects, again, all of this history time period, they're going to cover more in depth later on. But the goal of narration would be to get the child learning to listen with attention, which is a personal habit that they're developing. And then to share with you the information they've learned. And in middle and high school, narration stays all of those things, but also becomes the beginning of formal writing. So they will transition into written narrations, and then from those written narrations, they will develop into composition. So you're developing those skills, but you're just not expecting a first grader to be able to write down everything that they can communicate verbally. When we came home from private school, I started girls off in Ambleside years 5, 4, and 2, and then I was starting my kindergartner kind of in a year 0 and transitioning her into year 1. So I had a lot of experience of taking a child who was not used to narration. They did it a little bit in their school, but not at the level we were going to be doing it at home, and taking some of those harder Ambleside books and seeing how I could help them develop this skill. So in this video, I'm going to talk about how to use narration in a normal reading with Ambleside online. And then I'm also going to give you some tips if you have a reluctant narrator, and if you're trying to tell the difference if your child needs a little bit of prompting with narration, or if they need help developing their personal habit of attention towards the readings that they're listening to. Okay, so I'm using as an example a book from some of the early Ambleside years, Our Island Story. And so this is the beginning of British history, and then it will take the child through the first few years of Ambleside into early American history and beyond. So if you had a week where a chapter from Our Island Story was assigned, you could turn to it. Let's see what I turned to first. More about Alfred the Great. Okay, so I would sit down with my child. Now, a great thing to do in Ambleside Online is to pre-read the selections that you're going to read to your child. Now, the point of this would be I would pre-read it and I would note any words that I think they would struggle with knowing the definition of that would impact their understanding of the story. So I think there's a lot of words you don't need to worry about because they're going to gather the definition of those words from the context of the story. But if there's a word and it's really central to the storyline of the chapter, and you feel like your child might get hung up if they don't know the definition of that word, I would just make a little sticky note at the beginning of the chapter with those words and a definition that I feel like my child would understand. Okay, so in here it talks about Alfred dressing himself as a minstrel. And so I might just say, back then a minstrel was someone who performed songs for people. They helped cheer up the soldiers, because that's a central part of the storyline, is him disguising himself as this minstrel. So I would define those words. But again, you don't need to define every word. And then I would also, if it's kind of a chronological book, I might try and remind them of what happened in the chapter before. Some kids may be eager to tell you, like, could you remind me what happened last week? What do you remember? But for some kids, if narration is already a struggle and they're going to have to narrate at the end of the chapter, I wouldn't ask them to narrate at the beginning of the chapter too. So I would just do that review for them just to get them back in a frame of mind. Okay, so then we would read the chapter. Now, as you do more of the Ambleside weeks and years, you'll realize that maybe some chapters would do best split into smaller chunks. So if I have a highly distracted student or someone who is having a hard time with how hard some of the readings are, I would maybe just read a paragraph or two and then ask for a narration after that. And then we'd read a couple more paragraphs and ask for another narration. And then some books in the years, I will actually split into 2 days. And I am probably going to do some in-depth videos about all the years of Ambleside that I've done with some tips and tricks that I've learned for those. Or you can just learn them, on the go as you do them. But depending on how much focus your reader has, I would split these into smaller chunks, or you may be able to read the whole chapter. So then after you're done reading the chapter, the question I lead with is, can you tell me what that was about? And my girls respond fine to that, I think, because they know what's expected, but that question may scare a child who's new to narration. So there's some other ones that I'm going to give you later on in the video. But I would ask them what that chapter was about, and what happens next is up to the child. So sharing what they heard with you, usually their parent or someone they really want to please, can be very vulnerable for your child, especially if they're new to it. And especially if they're used to a school setting where there's maybe some shame or criticism either from classmates or from a teacher. So be very, very gentle when you ask for narrations and how you talk about narrations. The Ambleside online readings are naturally going to be very difficult for a child, especially as you get up into years 3, 4, and 5. And so the vocabulary is already challenging. The subject matter is challenging. It's not the same as them narrating a Pixar movie that they watched or a bedtime story that they read. And that's a good thing that it's challenging. We want to challenge them. But just keep all of this in mind when you ask for the narration. This is going to be a time to praise your child and not to critique them. Narration comes easier to some personalities than others. And so just meet your child wherever they're at, especially if this is a new skill to them, or you've entered a year of readings that are a big jump from the last year. Just be very kind in your feedback. I usually say something like, thank you so much for sharing that with me, or that was great, thank you. I do not correct things they got wrong. I do not suggest things that they could have done better, especially when they're new to it. Okay, so now the big question. What if your child responds with, I don't know? Or they have some type of resistance, they're maybe insecure, and so they're giving off some anger at being asked that. What can you do? Okay, so here are some techniques I use with a child who says that. The first thing you can do is model narration for them. So if they respond in kind of fear, or they're resentful or angry that you're asking them and they feel like they don't understand what happened, I would say, okay, well, I remember, and then I would start narrating parts of the story. And I would say, if you remember something that you want to share, just like tap me or raise your hand, and I'll let you say the next part. So that's an option. You can also have a timer, and you can say, okay, I'm going to set the timer for 30 seconds, and I'm going to narrate as much as I can of what I remember. And then in the other 30 seconds, you get to say anything I forgot, plus more things that happened. And in those cases, I might even specifically leave out some of the things I thought they would find really exciting. Like the guy was wearing a red cloak and it billowed in the wind as he pulled his sword, out of its sheath, that kind of stuff. I would leave that for them to remember. Another way you can go about this is to say, okay, I remember that first this happened. Then do you remember what happened next? Sometimes just you reminding them of different parts of the story or reminding them of the beginning of the story will get them going, and then they'll be successful in the narration. So if none of those are working, I would try making their narration just an answer to a broad question. So do not make it a yes or no question, but just ask them, who is your favorite person in that story? And they may say the guy that knocked over the wall. And you know what? Just say, oh, I thought he was really interesting too. Thank you for that, and move along. We have 12 years to develop this skill of narration, maybe less if you're starting sometime in the elementary or middle school years, but we do not need to push on one reading on one day. Just thank them for that and move on to the next reading. And when your child knows that you're not going to criticize them and you're not going to critique them, you're going to find that they open up more and are more eager to tell you what they did learn. Some other ways you can get a reluctant narrator to narrate is have them draw a picture of their favorite scene that happened, or act it out with Legos, like make a little Lego scene or build something out of it. And I personally haven't had to use those things. Those things are more time consuming than actually just narrating it, which usually takes like a minute depending on how talkative your child is. But if your child is kind of a little bit nervous about talking in front of people like that, or talking about things they know, which I do have a personality that is like that, those are some options. So again, like I said, we have 12 years or maybe a little less to develop this skill. So we don't need to make the narrations a power struggle, especially in the younger years. Okay, if none of those are helping in getting a reluctant narrator to narrate, I would start to look at things that you can do that would change things. So I already mentioned your child may need shorter chunks to listen to and then narrate. So even if you have to scale down to just a paragraph or just a few sentences, and then they'll think, oh, this is dumb. Of course I can narrate that. Well, you're showing them, yeah, you can narrate. So now I'm going to add another few sentences on and see how well you can do. So make them be successful by doing what you need to do. This doesn't need to be a discipline issue. This doesn't need to be a character issue. You're just trying to get your child to become a little bit better at this skill than they were before. And so if shorter chunks are not helping, I would start to look at if they maybe need some visual cues to help them. So in some stories, there are lots of characters. Their names are all similar, especially in some of the history stuff. And so maybe some visual representations of the characters that you move around as you're reading the story would be helpful. I've known people, especially in some of the Shakespeare with younger kids, to print out paper dolls, and the child helps you color them, and then you use them as you're going through the story over a long period of time. Some people may choose stuffed animals to represent certain people, and you can make it funny, like when they're in battle, make them attacking each other, and make them have funny voices. Another thing I've seen people make little like clothespin people to represent the characters. Now I would say don't do this, don't put this on your lap to do without knowing if you actually need it. I've never needed to use any of those things. And if you do need to use them, I would say make it an activity you do with your child. Like let them help you color them, let them help you paint things or cut out things or whatever. Don't add this to your list of things you need to do to be a good homeschooling mom, because they're absolutely not necessary, but some kids are better with some visual representation. Another thing is if your child needs something to do while they're listening to the reading. So throw out the idea that your kid needs to know how to sit at a desk and listen and not move and not talk or do anything. The discipline in those areas is going to come as they mature. But we all know that expecting a child to do that in kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade is not really healthy for them. And that's probably one of the reasons why you're considering homeschooling. So use homeschooling to your advantage. Let your child move while you're reading to them. Some kids may need to be sitting on some type of like a bouncy ball and they're bouncing up and down. Some kids may need to be in a handstand while they're listening to you. Sometimes kids do well having something to fidget with, like some kinetic sand, or there's these little things called specks that are little magnetic balls. Would not recommend them if you have babies and toddlers in the house because they are magnets, but those are fun. They may need to build with Legos while they're doing stuff. So just be flexible. Try and find a way to help your child figure out how they learn best and then use that. And then my other thing I would look into is if siblings are becoming a distraction. So we definitely ran into this with one of my girls not this past winter, but the winter before. We were living in a very small rental house when we first moved to Utah. It was winter. I had a 9-month-old to, she turned 1 during that school year. I had a 5-year-old and 7-year-old. And they would play all day, but they were very loud. The baby was very demanding. And it was really hard for my 5th grader to focus on the readings when I was constantly being interrupted in the middle of the reading and disrupting her focus, and so I'm asking her to give the habit of attention to the reading, but I'm not able to do that myself. And so I had to find some creative ways to let her be able to read those things. These books were maybe too hard for her to read on her own, and there weren't audiobooks available for them. So what I would do is every few weeks, I would lock myself into a closet. Sometimes I did it in my car, and I would just record myself reading some of those books to her. And then I would put them on a Yoto card in order of how she would listen to them. And she would have those, and she would be able to do the readings whenever she wanted to. She could find a quiet place and do them, and I wouldn't be interrupted because it's a recording. And then she could come to me and narrate. So sometimes it takes creativity, but make sure that you're not getting frustrated with your child for being distracted when really the distractions are not something that they can help. And there's something that you kind of need to problem solve with. Okay, so the last thing is, if it is not any of those things, if it is not an environmental issue with siblings, or that it's not a physical issue, they need to move. If you're sure they don't have ADHD or something like that, we do have that in this house, and it does make a difference, and it is a real thing. And you may need some outside help with that. So if you're sure it's not any of those things, and it's just an attitude problem where they do not want to do school, they may decide that a certain book is boring and they don't want to listen to it and they refuse to narrate it, then you're going to start to work on their personal habit of attention. And you are going to say, okay, well, we are not going to reread that. And without shaming, you can communicate like, I think you really would have enjoyed this. And I know that you can understand it. It's not too hard for you. And I think you would have liked to listen to it, but we are going to move on. And next week, when we come back to this book, we can try again. And so it's a really fine line to do that without kind of shaming them. But you want to communicate like, that was your one chance, and mom is not going to give you a second chance in this, because when you come to school, I am laying down the feast for you. I'm providing the interesting ideas, and it's your job to partake of it. And if you're going to refuse to, then I cannot force you to. And in the end, you know, even if you spend a year with someone who is a reluctant learner, but you teach them, first of all, that they are going to choose to listen the first time. You're not going to make it too long for them. You're not going to make it too hard for them. There's a trust in you. And then you're not going to shame them when they feel like maybe they didn't do a good job or whatever. There is going to be a change. And so I would be pretty firm on that, not saying we will reread it. That can be disappointing to a child sometimes, but they should take that disappointment and they can say, okay, what can I do next time so that I won't be disappointed in this? And they may not think those exact thoughts, but you will see their behavior change. But if you are shaming, if you are discouraging, if you are angry in it, it is not going to have the intended effect that we want it to have. So the goal in doing this is to communicate the idea that they can choose to focus for the 10 to 15 minutes that this reading is going to take. And like I said, they have a trust in you that you're doing what's best for them, that you're not going to be angry with them. And the goal would be that then they choose to come to the readings with the mindset that this may not be something they want to do, or it may not be their favorite thing, but they're going to choose to do it. And that lesson, as we know for our kids, is so important. So the last thing I wanted to discuss was how to switch from reading the books to your child to them reading them on their own, and then how to switch from oral narrations to written narrations. And so regarding the books, I would say in years 3 to 4, depending on where your child is at, there are usually a few books in the Ambleside curriculum that I feel like they can read on their own. Again, if I read them to them, they may get more out of it, but that isn't necessarily the goal of the readings for me. The goal of the readings is to start exposing them to vocabulary, start exposing them to ideas, and they may just walk away with one little tiny nugget of an idea from each reading, and I would consider that successful, because how much do we get from what we read? You know, we read books and we take away what we take away from it, but I don't think that we could regurgitate the entire book to somebody if they asked. So the goal would just be that they see, okay, I can read and I can understand what's happening, and my mom is going to be happy to hear what I learned from this. So when I go over my videos of the different Ambleside years, I will give suggestions of what books I think children can embrace and start to read on their own, and which books they may still need to be read to. A lot of times the literature selections, I will either read to them or I will have them do an audiobook of a really great recording, but I will always have them read along in the book if I am not the one reading it to them, because they need that exposure to the written word and the spelling of words and all of that. So this kind of happened naturally with my daughter when she came home from private school, and she was in 6th grade, but I actually started her in year 4. I started all my girls a few years back from their grade level, because there are options to catch up in the later years in Ambleside. And also, if they didn't finish all 12 years of Ambleside, they would still be reading at a very high level in years 10 and 11. But I didn't want her to be discouraged by this new style of learning, and I wanted her to feel successful. So she started year 4, and I started off offering to read all of the books to her and have her narrate to me. Well, with 4 younger siblings, distracting me, she used to just get tired of waiting on me to read the books to her. So she just started reading them on her own. And that was a great transition. And I loved seeing her take that ownership of her school. And she started writing down her narrations because she didn't like having to wait for me to be available to narrate too. And so that's a great transition time. And that has happened with my second daughter as well. I think the younger siblings seeing the older siblings become big kids by getting to read their books and narrate through writing makes them more eager to do that too. And then I have a 6th grader who is in year 4 this year, and we split it half and half. There were some books that she read on her own and some that I read to her, and she still did all of her narrations orally. And next year is when I will start to switch her to some narrations written down and some oral. And I never try and make this like a big battle. I will let them narrate orally to me as long as they want to. But often they naturally just find that writing down their narrations is quicker for them, and they get school done faster. Now, written narrations are naturally going to be more succinct than an oral narration, and I think that's okay. And I would not use their written narrations as a chance to work on spelling and grammar. They will be getting that instruction through dictation, copy work, and other areas. And you don't want your child to feel like a lack of freedom in expressing their ideas through writing. So I would just let their narrations be their narrations, and we will be working on spelling, grammar, all those things in other areas. And I think you'll find that the spelling naturally improves when the child starts reading a lot of the books on their own, because they're going to be seeing how words are spelled, and they're going to be making those connections in their brain. I know that there are, with some other Charlotte Mason curriculums besides Ambleside, some books that have like writing prompts for narrations, and those are fine. I gave some ideas for prompts in oral narration earlier, but I've never had to use those, and you don't have to buy those either. Just simply asking what was that about, or giving some of the ones I gave examples of like, tell me your favorite part, who is your favorite character, is enough. But if you want to use those, totally fine. The goal would just be to get the child sharing what they learned in their own words. So I hope this was helpful to you, maybe as a new mom coming to a Charlotte Mason education and wondering what narration looks like in real life. And I would definitely say the only way I think you could do narration wrong is if you make it a time to critique or shame your child. And I'm not saying that from a place of perfection. I'm saying that from a person who has learned this in real life. So narration is something that is hard to do, harder than we think. It may not be hard for us to narrate the books we're reading to our children, but it would be hard for us to narrate books that are challenging to us. And so just in the back of your mind, keep in mind, do not make this a time to critique them. Do not make this a time to shame them. Thank them for sharing with you. Let that maybe be a response that you have to cultivate, but eventually will be your natural response. And I think you will love seeing the results you get when your child feels free to communicate with you, not just in things they naturally enjoy, like the games they're playing or the books they're reading for fun, but in their school as well.